Welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at something called professional employer organizations.
PEOs.
PEOs. Yeah, you got it. And you probably heard of some of the big players in this space like ADP and Paychex.
Right, and what's fascinating about PEOs is how they can transform the way small and mid-sized businesses operate.
For sure.
Especially in complex areas like HR benefits, legal compliance.
So we're talking more than just payroll here. We're going deep with this article from the Yale Journal on Regulation Bulletin called Professional Employers and the Transformation of Workplace Benefits to see how PEOs work and if they're cracked up to be.
Exactly. We'll unpack this whole co-employment model and look at the history of PEOs.
Oh, yeah.
Which is more interesting than you might think, and we'll break down if those promises of Fortune 500 level benefits actually hold up.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. For someone who's never heard of a PEO, what do?
Imagine you're a small business owner. You're great at what you do. Maybe you're a baker or a software developer or an artist. But the administrative side of running a business, payroll, benefits, legal requirements, that's not your strength.
It can be a real drag.
It can be a huge drain on your time and energy.
Wearing all the hats.
Exactly. And that's where PEO comes in. They become a co-employer for your employees.
Okay.
Now, this doesn't mean they're telling you who to hire or how to run your day-to-day operations. You still control that.
Gotcha.
Huh.
So what does the PEO actually handle?
They handle things like payroll processing, benefits administration, and making sure you're complying with all those employment laws. They become the employer of record for tax and legal purposes.
So to the outside world, it looks like my employees work for the PEO.
Exactly. But you, the business owner, still make the decisions about hiring, firing, and managing your team. It's a unique setup that can really benefit smaller businesses.
Yeah, I could see the appeal, especially for businesses without a dedicated HR department or the expertise to handle all those legal complexities.
Yeah.
You mentioned the history of PEOs is a bit more interesting than people might think. What did you mean?
Well, PEOs evolved from what used to be called employee leasing firms, and their early days were a bit of a Wild West.
Oh.
Some of these firms were using loopholes in laws around pensions, workers' compensation, unemployment taxes.
Playing a bit fast and loose.
They were. Some cases of fraud on taxes, which gave the industry a bad reputation.
So it was a cat and mouse game with regulators.
You could say that regulators started cracking down, closing loopholes, and the industry had to adapt.
It makes sense.
They rebranded as professional employer organizations and focused on legitimate ways to help businesses while following the law.
So some growing pains, but they came out stronger and more professional.
Exactly. And that evolution has continued as the regulations around PEOs have become more complex.
And how are PEOs regulated today? It sounds like it could be a bit of a patchwork.
You're right. It's a mix of state and federal regulations. Some states have really strict oversight. Others are more lenient.
Okay.
At the federal level, there was a big change in 2014 with the Tax Increase Prevention Act, or TIPA. This act created a program for certifying PEOs called CPEOs, or Certified Professional Employer Organizations.
So that's a way for businesses to identify PEOs that meet certain standards.
Exactly. To become a CPEO, a PEO has to meet requirements like financial bonding annual audits, proving they're on top of their employment tax obligations.
Adds a level of trust.
It was a big step towards accountability and transparency in the industry.
That makes sense. Gives businesses some peace of mind. And have there been other developments too?
Yes, the Department of Labor made a ruling in 2019 allowing PEOs to sponsor multiple employer retirement plans, or MEPs.
Interesting.
Then the Secure Act of 2019 further supported PEOs as sponsors of what are called pooled employer plans, or PPs.
So it seems like the government is seeing the potential of PEOs to help smaller businesses offer benefits.
You could say that, but as with anything, there are two sides to every coin.
Right.
While these developments create opportunities, they also raise questions about whether PEOs are really delivering on their promises.
And if there are any downsides businesses need to be aware of. Okay, good point. That brings us to the big question. Are PEOs actually living up to the hype? Do businesses actually get better benefits and lower costs? Or is it all just marketing?
Well, the article we're looking at today points out something really important. There's actually not a lot of solid data to answer that question definitively. Really, you'd think with such a big industry, there'd be tons of research on whether PEOs are actually beneficial.
Right. You would think.
Turns out there's not as much solid evidence as you might expect. There are some studies, though.
Okay.
This article mentions a 2020 study by Natalya Shnitser. She actually wrote the article we're looking at.
Oh, cool.
And it looked at retirement plans offered through PEOs.
Gotcha.
And there's an analysis from Morningstar, also from 2020, that looked at plans from CPEOs.
Okay, so what did they find? Did PEOs live up to the hype, or was there some fine print we need to watch out for?
Well, let's start with retirement plans. This is where things get really interesting.
Uh-oh.
Schnitzer's study found that PEO-sponsored retirement plans often have higher administrative fees than plans run directly by single employers.
Really? I thought the whole point of PEOs was to use their size to get better deals.
You would think, right?
Yeah.
But the article highlights a potential problem here, conflicts of interest.
Oh.
PEOs can actually make money from fees on both sides. They might charge the employer to set up and manage the plan, and then they might also collect fees from the employees who are in the plan.
So it's not really in their best interest to get the lowest fees then?
Exactly. It creates a situation where their profits might not align with what's best for the businesses and employees they're supposed to be serving.
That's a big red flag for any business owner thinking about using a PEO. What about healthcare plans? Are there any issues there?
There are definitely some things to be cautious about. Historically, PEOs have been involved with what are called MWAs, or multiple employer welfare arrangements.
MWAs?
Yeah, these are basically group health plans that let smaller employers team up to buy insurance. But MWAs have a bit of a checkered past.
Oh, no.
Instances of fraud, unpaid claims, so it's something to be aware of.
Right off the bat, that's a concern.
It is. And it's not just... PEOs are also increasingly involved in setting up what are called association health plans, or AHPs.
Okay.
Another type of group health plan, and they've been presented as a way for small businesses to get more affordable coverage. But there are worries that some AHPs, especially those offered through PEOs, might be trying to sidestep certain rules in the Affordable Care Act.
So finding ways to offer plans that don't have the same level of coverage.
That's the concern. Some states have taken action, though. California, for example, passed a law that says AHPs have to meet the same requirements as other health plans no matter how they're set up or who's sponsoring them.
It seems like with both retirement plans and healthcare plans, there's a real need for more transparency and oversight to make sure PEOs are acting in the best interests of everyone involved.
I couldn't agree more. Transparency is key. We need clear, standardized rules so businesses can compare different PEOs, really understand what they're getting, and make smart choices.
And from the employee side, they need to know their interests are protected, that they're not getting stuck with high fees or bad coverage because their employer chose to use a PEO.
Exactly. The article brings up another important point. The whole U.S. benefits system is built around the idea that employers are the main providers of benefits.
Right.
But with PEOs and other third parties getting involved, that model is changing.
And what does that shift mean? What could it mean for the future of workplace benefits? That's something we'll have to explore in the last part of our deep dive.
It's fascinating, isn't it? This whole world of PEOs.
Yeah.
We've seen how they can be a good option for small businesses to offer competitive benefits,
Yeah.
but also how there can be some hidden downsides.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like with anything this complex, there are always those nuances and trade-offs and, sometimes unintended consequences.
Right.
And this article really drives home the point that the rise of PEOs has some serious implications for the future of benefits.
For sure, especially here in the U.S.
Especially here in the U.S.
Yeah.
You were talking earlier about how our benefit system is so tied to employers. What happens when you bring in these third-party players like PEOs?
Well, it really starts to blur the lines of responsibility. Traditionally, the employer has been the one, providing benefits, making sure they're up to par.
Right.
But when you have a PEO acting as a co-employer, it raises questions about who's ultimately accountable.
Yeah. So if an employee has a problem with their health plan or their retirement plan, who are they supposed to go to? The PEO.
Yeah.
Their actual employer.
That's the gray area we're heading into. And it could make things confusing for workers and even reduce their leverage.
Oh, how so?
Well, if they're not sure who to hold accountable, it can make it harder to address problems or, push for better benefits.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about it, workers might not have even chosen to have their benefits run through a PEO. That's usually a decision made by the employer.
Right. It is. And as PEOs become more common, it's really important that we have a bigger conversation about how to make sure workers' rights and interests are protected in this changing landscape.
So we've talked about the need for PEOs to be more transparent. But what about stricter regulations? Is that part of the answer?
I think so. We need clear regulations that lay out the roles and responsibilities of both PEOs and the companies they work with.
Right.
When it comes to providing benefits, there should be ways to make sure workers have clear information about their benefits, that there are ways to resolve disputes, and that PEOs are held to a certain standard.
And we need more data on the impact of PEOs on things like quality of benefits, costs, worker satisfaction. We can't just go off of anecdotes or marketing. We need evidence to guide our decisions.
Absolutely. More research is definitely needed in this area. We need to understand the long-term effects of this move toward co-employment and third-party benefits administration. What are the pros and cons? How can we minimize the risks and make sure workers aren't ending up in a worse position?
It's a lot to consider. So for our listeners who have been with us on this deep dive, what are the main things they should be thinking about if they're considering working with a PEO or if their employer is?
First, do your research. Don't just take the PEO's word for it. Look into their track record, their fees, how they manage benefits.
Okay.
Ask the tough questions about their conflict of interest policies, how they make sure things are transparent, and what options employees have if there are problems.
Good advice. And on a broader level, I think it's important to remember that the way we work and get benefits is changing.
Right?
PEOs are just one part of that.
Yeah, that's a really important point. This isn't just some niche issue. It touches on these fundamental questions about the relationship between employers and employees and how we ensure everyone has access to good, affordable benefits in an economy that's constantly changing.
This has been a really interesting deep dive and definitely gives us a lot to think about.
It has.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of PEOs and the future of workplace benefits. Until next time, stay curious.